a gun in the face.
Then all of a sudden, they all kind of lined up. They pointed their guns at me. And this is the point where I thought, I'm going to die today.
Started 2 years of horror for an American in Venezuela.
They said, you need to give us your phone and get ready because you're coming with us.
I'm Becky Bruce, and I spent a year researching and piecing together Josh and Tammy Holt's story about their ordeal in a notorious prison.
That's when everything started to turn bad. We had another pound on the door. Boom, boom, boom. And there was the police once again.
You can binge all of the episodes of Hope in Darkness on kslpodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, so just to catch everybody up on speed, you were going through some depression, you tried self-medicating, you went to a relationship counselor, you said there'd be weeks on end that you didn't talk to your spouse, you said you felt like your kids didn't want you around, and for somebody who's in a depressed state of mind, that seems like that's a perfect storm.
Yeah.
So where do you
go? I want it out.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Because I had gone through so many different medications, I have just pill bottles laying around, right? And they're not, I mean, it's different than like a Lortab, right? Like because of the heart surgery, I've understood a little bit of what Lortab feels like. It's nothing like that. It's more of a, some of these, like lithium, for example, you Google lithium and it says, if you come off this stuff cold turkey, we got problems. Like,
you have to
seizures.
be very careful.
Yeah,
and follow,
very, very careful.
Mm-hmm.
And that scared the shit out of me, right? So that's kind of why the self-medicating started to happen. Well, you fast forward to kind of the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, beginning of last year, and it got pretty bad. I mean,
this is pretty recent then.
Yeah, very recent. And I remember driving to work. It was snowing, and people were sliding out, and I thought, this is it. Like, if I can get in an accident bad enough to where it kills me, then my kids won't think I committed suicide, that I copped out, that it was an accident. But really, it was on purpose. I know that's what I was trying to do. And I said that to a friend, and he's like, "Dude, you gotta figure something out." And what do you do as a friend, right? Like, I don't know how to fix it. That's the hardest thing for me is when people come up to me and say, "What can I do to help?" I don't know. I don't know how to help myself. I'm still struggling to this day. So I have tried everything at this point, and I am just about as low as I feel like I can go. I have a plan. I have an idea of what I would do, right, to end my life. I've Googled enough and thought about enough and figured out what I would do to make it happen, right? And then I start trying to figure out how do I get it so the kids don't see. To where they don't have to have that visual. And even my spouse, like my wife, I don't want her to live with that forever. Like, that's awful. Like, to have that image in your head that just won't go away.
So you put some serious thought into this.
Serious thought.
What is, as a therapist, Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
That's scary. I mean, we talk about the fact that there are stages in the progression of suicidal thinking, and you're at this point where you've done actual research and you're coming up with a plan, and you're considering other people in your life, not considering them in the way we hope, but trying to just protect them from what you feel like you're about to do. So the level of severity is very high, and no wonder you had friends that were really concerned about you.
Yeah. So I started researching a little bit, and I came across ketamine. And my oldest brother's dentist does wisdom teeth, and I know what ketamine is. You can Google ketamine on YouTube, and it's some pretty freaking sweet. Like, kids are going crazy in a zombie apocalypse. They're pretty funny, right? It's a crazy
It's a hallucinogen.
drug. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And
I thought it was a horse tranquilizer.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, is. It's used for that. It's used for other things as well.
Yeah. A lot of different uses in it. You kind of researched it.
But the dosing of using ketamine for depression treatment is relatively new.
Yes.
And University of Utah has a clinic, and some private treatment clinics are popping up because the research is starting to show that it has some benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. So I tried to figure out, if you look at the cost, they recommend 6 initial infusions. So I go to, it's called Mindful Infusions, and it's an IV drip that they pump into you for 50 minutes. It takes a little bit to get started. And I'm monitored up on a oxygen machine, or like a finger thing for oxygen, heart, and then blood pressure, right? So I'm being monitored. And they infuse this thing. I think I'm up to, I think average is probably 135 milligrams for me is what I've been doing. I think for wisdom teeth, my brother said I think he does like 50 milligrams, just a quick shot. So they kind of try to see it. And there's different ways and different, as I've talked to people get a shot and they wake up and there's therapists there and they can kind of have some talk therapy a little bit. Mine, you just kind of go in and sit in a chair and
they have medical staff, I hope.
Yeah, nurse anesthetist is there. She's monitoring me. It's like I had to have my mom come just so she didn't think I was, following my little sister's, because if you Google it, Special K is a thing, and it's.
So did you try this out of desperation?
Absolutely. Yep. In my mind. Well, let me back up, because the price is a huge factor, right? Because it's not approved. Insurances won't approve it, right? The FDA just approved a nasal spray, but it's alternative medicine. It's kind of like some of these cancer treatments that aren't approved. But I thought it was $2,500 for 6 treatments, and then it's every so often as you needed. And in my mind, I'm thinking $2,500. That's we could go to Disneyland. We could do all of these things, and it becomes pretty selfish. And through the talk therapy we had with our counselor and stuff, I'm feeling pretty shitty that I've been so removed and gone through this. And I at this point had kind of started reaching out to some family and close friends to tell them what's going on. Like, hey, marriage is I'm feeling like this is what's going on. And here's why. And so trying to just communicate as best I can, posting on Instagram and trying to help people understand that there's help out there. And this ketamine literally saved my life. It's a game changer. Had my last one about 2 weeks ago. I think I probably waited a little bit too long, just because you kind of start feeling low again. And then you go in and get a shot or an infusion, and it kind of starts to help.
You're listening to Project Recovery. We're listening to Nate Smith's story about depression and what he's doing now with ketamine. We'll be right back.
Two friends taking pictures of the rising full moon on a summer night.
2 teenage kids doing what teenage kids do.
When a stranger with a gun and a death wish changed everything.
It was violent, it was senseless, and I will never understand it, I will never accept it.
I'm Amy Donaldson, and unfortunately, we're all too familiar with stories about how violence shatters lives. But what we rarely see is how they are rebuilt. In a new podcast, The Letter, we relive tragedy, but only so we can hear the rest of the story. The struggle to reclaim lives, the realities of grief, and the possibilities of forgiveness.
I believe in miracles. Sometimes I thought, there are no miracles. Yeah, there are, and this is a big one.
Follow The Letter at theletterpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
So I want to ask a little bit about this ketamine. Is it a euphoric feeling that you get? And does that euphoric feeling stay with you?
No, so it's you for the morphine drip, right? Open heart surgery that you're hitting the button to
I've never had it.
Oh, it's great. You should try it.
Open heart surgery?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
But I mean,
so it is if painkillers, if you've had painkillers, same thing, right? So you feel this thing. If you were to take more than what's prescribed, you'd get a little bit of a high, right?
Right.
Some people don't like that. I do find it interesting and enjoyable in some cases. I won't lie. But you go in, you get the IV, and the best way to describe it is I'm in the Matrix for an hour, and you're experiencing these like just weird episodes. I mean, you're tripping essentially, and that's the side effect they suggest or they mention, is that one of the side effects is tripping. My wife hates that feeling. So she would absolutely hate this, and it's awful.
You have to give into it, and it's a feeling of being sort of out of control and out of your body.
Totally.
So people who've done hallucinogens before would know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so it's an interesting experience, and it's I've had a bad trip where I just kind of felt like, you talk about being out of control. I felt like, as you're going in, you're kind of feeling low anyways, right? So you're like, man, all right, well, this is it. And I have no control over what's going to happen. Like, I truly trust Janelle who does it. I thought, man, this is it. Like, if I die, she's here, and sometimes someone's there with me the whole time. Sometimes I get dropped off and then picked up. It just depends on who it is. But I thought, okay, so at least I got 2 people in here. If I go, like, at least I'm safe, I'm not anywhere that I shouldn't be. I'm not abusing it, and I think that's kind of some of the concern. But it was uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. And I woke up just kind of thinking, I don't know if I'm going to do this again. But I'm kind of nervous to try to go back on the Zoloft, the Lexapros, or the lithium, just because it didn't work for me.
So I'm going to jump in here as a psychologist, somebody who doesn't prescribe medication but treats depression. And I'm going to ask you, has anybody talked to you about getting involved in cognitive behavioral therapy for depression? And one of the things I want to occasionally on this show set the record straight about is counseling and therapy are not the same thing. They may on the outside look like the same thing. Counseling is just that. You're sitting down with somebody who has some expertise, and they're listening and they're giving advice, and that's great, and it may be very helpful and appropriate for a person's needs. Marriage counseling, for example, is very helpful often. Cognitive therapy would be retraining patterns of thinking and behavior that even makes a neurological change. So anytime we learn something, there's a neurological correlation physiologically in our brain that happens. If you memorize something, then you've created a neural pathway. So when I ask somebody their birthday and they can just tell me right away what their birthday is, they weren't born with that knowledge, right? And in fact, it's interesting working with some children that have been adopted from Africa. In certain African countries, they don't really celebrate the birthday. It's more the season of the year. Mm-hmm. And they don't have that neural pathway. They don't know exactly when their birthday is. But we celebrate it so much as kids that it's like I-15 in your brain. It's like, a super highway of neurons connected, so you can pull that information up right away, right? Sure. Depression or happiness, any strong emotion, helps lay down these neural pathways. And so by the time a person's well into adulthood, if they've struggled with depression, then they have a lot of neural pathways or ways of thinking that are laid down by the depression itself. Mm-hmm. And so they're depressive ways of thinking. We might call that pessimism, negativity. There's also the emotional channels that are triggered, sadness, discouragement. And so cognitive therapy helps us retrain those patterns of thinking, increasing optimism, decreasing pessimism, learning to think and behave in new ways. Sure. And so if you look at outcome research on treating depression, the best outcomes are always a combination of some sort of appropriate medication and cognitive and behavioral therapy. So I do have to just kind of jump in and say that may be part of the missing piece for you. I currently have several patients, I think 3 or 4, that are or recently have had ketamine treatments. And it's been an education to me to listen to some of the docs in our department at the university talk about the clinic and how ketamine works. And I still have a lot to learn there. But it seems to be very, very helpful, especially for people that are what we call kind of treatment resistant. You've gone through all the other medications and they haven't really been strong enough or the right medication for your depression. But depression isn't just biology. It's this unique matrix of our biology being connected with our patterns of thinking and behaving every day. You can't think something, you can't feel something without your biology being triggered. And so they're just all wrapped up in together. So that might be something that you consider getting involved in with a good therapist. And not all therapists are qualified or trained to do cognitive therapy.
I think that's the hard part, is that this culture that we're in here in, Mormonton, Salt Lake, it's tough. I went to a bishop 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and kind of described, I was trying to get my temple recommend renewed, and I expressed some anger, and he didn't. The human factor is taken out, he recommended a book, which actually ended up being great, but he's like, talk about books. Sorry, forgot about that. But he says,
wait till the movie comes out.
That's why I'm waiting. But he's like, read it with a grain of salt. And that was the advice that I got. And so you've got these people, especially men who are suffering silently with this depression, and they have nowhere to go. He didn't even ask me, how's your relationship? How's, what's going on in life? What do you think is causing it? How's work? There's multiple factors that are going into everyday life that can cause someone to go into a depressive state.
And it's most often a combination of things.
Sure, absolutely.
As humans, we always want to find the answer to the problem.
There is, yeah.
And, the problem is multifactorial, and the answers are often multifactorial as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's why I wanted to have Nate on today, is because I think there's a lot of us out there suffering silently in depression, don't know where to go, don't know where to turn, maybe have tried to self-medicate, maybe have gone the route of antidepressants with no luck, some maybe had great success. And then he was telling me about the ketamine, and I thought that was interesting. And that's what this podcast is kind of about, is to show people what's out there. We're not by any means endorsing ketamine. I just wanted people to know, hey, I've heard about this.
It's an option.
And people have told me about it, and I finally have got access to somebody who's doing it. Yeah. And I know you've got a wealth of knowledge. I want to get you guys in the same room and try to, just get exposure on it. And like when we started this podcast, start a conversation.
Well, I really appreciate Nate bringing up the fact that I think it is a unique problem for men, women as well, but maybe in our culture a little bit more for men, that we have sort of the old-fashioned John Wayne attitude, whether anyone's put that on us or not. I don't want to feel weak. I don't want to feel insecure. I don't want to admit I have problems. So you just get up and you tough it out and you go to work and you hold it in. You hope it goes away. If you're not, like most people, if you're not trained in understanding what depression is, then you would assume, well, I felt down before. This will go away too. Mm-hmm. And then you do get into things like trying to go in and get some treatment. You bring up a beautiful point, and that is that a lot of the medications prescribed for depression, especially the first ones that a doctor is going to prescribe, the SSRI medications, take 4 to 8 weeks to really kick in to their full benefit, and so that's a long time to wait when you're feeling depressed.
And by the time you go in, you've already waited.
You've already waited months or years, and then you may wait 6 weeks and realize it's not helping, so we have to switch, and the medicines can become more heavy duty and have more side effects, and so there are problems with that as well. Unfortunately, the cognitive therapy I was just making a case for also is it's CBT is what it's often referred to as, and I tell my graduate students, change the T, cognitive behavioral therapy, to training. You have to have that mindset that this is like going to the gym. If you go to the gym every day, I just had a guy come in my office yesterday, and I haven't seen him for a few months, and he looks fantastic. I mean, I think he said he's lost 38 pounds since like around November. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I just go on the treadmill every single day for an hour. Mm-hmm. That's all. He's changed his eating a little bit. But so that didn't happen in a week. It took several months. But here's this guy who looks great, and feels better. And so cognitive therapy takes time. Sure. Medications take time. And that's why it's so easy to turn to something that doesn't take time. And those are, prescription pills, drugs, alcohol, those things, sex, pornography, all these things that are
quick fixes,
but make things worse in the long run. But when you feel so miserable, it's very understandable. And those of us who have friends and family members, like you're talking about with your uncle Chris, I like Chris better too, by the way.
Yeah.
We need to learn to have empathy and understanding that it's desperation that often drives a person to experiment with and become addicted to these sorts of quick fix things.
I think the conversation just needs to start, right? Like at some point, the men that are suffering in silence need to reach out to somebody, and who that is, I don't know, and I don't have all the answers. But unfortunately, it's a problem inside the church. And as a caveat, I'm an active member of the church, hold the current temple recommend, but these bishops aren't trained. But yet the church comes out with a 12-step program for addiction recovery. It's like, why can't the brethren come out with something to help these guys? Because like my insurance doesn't work with the U. Like I've gone to try to do the ketamine with the U, but it was going to be a little bit more to go up there because my insurance doesn't work. And so,
well, don't get me started on healthcare.
Okay, so
I'll go down that path all day.
That's where your mind goes, right? It's like, I can't afford that, but I can afford a 6-pack of beer, right? And that's going to take it away for a few hours.
And I think that's a bigger conversation to be had later. But I think you're right, and I think what we should probably leave everybody with is, Dr. Mann, I think there's a lot of people out there that are suffering from depression, and a lot of times we've seen where depression can take people, and we've seen the horrific ending to that. We've also seen people climb out of depression. So if someone's out there and they're suffering with depression, there are some places they can call. There's some things they can do. And where would they be?
Well, a couple of thoughts. One, first of all, is I would love people to really absorb this message, and that is that depression is not a flaw in your character.
Agreed.
There are so many examples of people, including very clearly someone like Abraham Lincoln, who we would say had a tremendous character, also suffered with major clinical depression. You need to be courageous enough to say to yourself, if I'm struggling with depression, it's not my fault. It's not a flaw in my character. That's number one. Number two, you really need to share to the best of your vocabulary, the best that you can, with someone who's close to you, that you know loves you and cares about you. Hopefully that's a spouse. Maybe it's your parent. Somebody, you need to let them know that you're struggling so that you're not struggling alone. When it comes to seeking treatment, believe it or not, just your good old-fashioned family doctor is a great place to start, because the access is so quick. People often say, okay, I feel depressed. I've admitted it. I've told my wife I'm ready to get some help. I probably should see a psychiatrist. That's what we do, right? But unfortunately, getting in, that's like seeing a specialist. And so getting into those appointments can take some maneuvering, some insurance headaches, definitely a lot of time. And I usually recommend within a day or two, you can usually see your family doctor. Go in there and just tell them. Be straightforward with them. Quit being a man about it and saying that, well, it's my back that hurts, or, whatever. Like, just get in and say how you really feel. They can often then refer and get you on a fast track to seeing a therapist. People without insurance, there are options. You can utilize things like Valley Mental Health and call them, and they have sliding scale fee and help work with people who don't have insurance. There are options for getting help. Many places, if you work at any sort of moderate to large corporation, they often have health people available through your human resource department, where you can get some help for health care, and including mental health care. So I would highly recommend, listen, depression is not something you have to live with. You do not have to be depressed all the time, every day. Some people have chronic depression, and in a way they live with it, but you can live with the treatment of it. You can feel tremendously better than you do today. Depression also, it's not just sadness. That's another thing for guys to understand. If you feel irritable for no good reason, if you're struggling sleeping, if you're low on energy, my favorite fancy word for depression, a type of depression, is anhedonia, which is a lack of pleasure in things that used to be enjoyable. Right there, if you think about that one, a lot of men out there go, oh yeah, I used to love to golf, or I used to love to go fishing, I used to love to get out and do these. I don't care about that anymore.
I just want to sit on the couch.
I just want to sit. And that's a red flag for your depression. So I highly, I applaud you for coming on the show and talking so authentically and openly about it, and talking about how it leads to, like, look at all the spider webs of of destruction in a person's life, right? It damages your relationship with your family, can lead to problems at work. It can lead to problems in your faith. It can lead to problems with addiction. So people often who have been on our show in the past have become addicts, and they're here talking about that experience, but it really traces back to trying to deal with something like depression. Yeah. So there's not a good enough excuse to just live with it. You need to get out and try to get some help. And if you're one of those people that says, "Oh, I've tried that before," well, maybe you need to try again. Yeah. Maybe you've tried counseling and you've gone to a good counselor, but they really weren't qualified to help you with cognitive therapy. Or maybe you tried Prozac and it didn't really work for you and you gave up. Maybe the medications weren't working because you were actively addicted to a substance, and those counteract each other. So let's try again if you've tried before. Yeah.
I love it. And Nate, thank you very much for stopping by. I did want to tell you right now, you are the current record holder for swearing on this podcast. Congratulations! Really? Yeah, you blew.
I can't beat him in golf, but I'll beat him in swearing.
Yep, you blew Christian out. Yeah. Every time you swore, I looked at Josh, the producer, and he was like, "Son of a gun! I got to go back and edit this out."
Do we have to edit it out?
Yeah, we're going to bleep a little bit. Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
I think.
Sorry, Mom.
Hey, I'm with. We should just leave it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we will bleep a little bit. You're listening to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. If you know somebody who needs some help, have them do what I did and give Pinnacle Recovery Center a call. Project Recovery is a KSL podcast.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.